of the most acclaimed novels of American literature, John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men is infamous for its lessons on human nature as well as the unattainable American dream. Now, while the book references many themes and motifs throughout, the specific passage that I have chosen speaks to the force of the natural world as well as natural human instincts. Despite the fact that it's very short and without dialogue, its goal is to introduce the setting of the chapter, which it does very well. John Steinbeck writes exquisitely about the heron and the water snake, moments before Lenny enters into the clearing. And despite the simplicity of this, the central assertion is still depicted clearly. The innate human nature to attain a higher social order can often lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness, which can be seen as a parallel to the natural world. It is Steinbeck's masterful use of imagery, symbolism, metaphors, and characterization that builds a convincing and unique passage. And firstly, the author uses detailed imagery, primarily in paragraphs 1 to 4 and 7, to convey mood. Described in remarkable detail, the heron and the water snake are used both to support the central assertion as well as to evoke certain emotions within readers. And although this prey and predator relationship may seem normal at first, readers will feel its underlying literary genius through the feeling of helplessness. This helplessness is shown through the depiction of Lenny as the water snake. The water snake swims calmly with its periscope head straight into the mouths of the predator. This calm and helpless mood is an attestation to the isolation felt as a result of human nature, of aiming for more, especially for more power. Certain adjectives are used repeatedly to emphasize specific details. In paragraphs 1 to 3, the motionless and waiting heron is seen preying on the water snake with its periscope head. Steinbeck wants readers to understand the parallel the situation draws because it is symbolic of human nature and how the very goal of our existence is often plagued with loneliness. Whether the parallels between Candy and his dog, Lenny, and George, or Slim, who tends to the horses that broke his hand, many characters come to this power struggle between prey and predator. Steinbeck's utilization of imagery in this passage laid down the basis for mood, contrast, and repetition to support the central assertion. Both internal and external struggles for power often lead to feelings of loss and suffering. Moreover, the significance of symbolism is essential to this passage because, once again, Steinbeck uses repetition to emphasize the importance of the heron and the water snake. This is attributed to the fact that while the heron is symbolic for George, the water snake is symbolic of Lenny. With its periscope head, both Lenny and the water snake should be able to see the unforeseeable danger in their near future. However, both still swim up to the predator, like the heron. This is shown through the fact that while physically Lenny is big and strong, mentally and emotionally he is weak. He amplifies the mice in the title of the book through his frailty. And the heron is symbolic for all of George's values. George is always motionless and waiting, just like the heron, because he is waiting for the right time and the right moment to strike. This shows his very calculative nature as compared to Lenny's very clueless nature. Ultimately, it is their individual needs and wants, symbolized by each individual character's animals, that foretells the ending of the book. This foreshadows when George shoots Lenny. Soon, Lenny will be plucked from the lake, his sanctuary, by George, just like how the water snake was plucked from the lake by the heron. This is because of the fact that Steinbeck wants to show readers through symbolism and foreshadow the similarities between the human and natural world when it comes to this predatory relationship for power. Furthermore, metaphors and allusions are used to help readers better understand the relationship between Lenny and George as well as their relationship with the lake. In the concluding paragraph, paragraph 7, the light is seen climbing over the mountains. And this is metaphorical for the fact that George will soon come and rescue Lenny just as promised. And in a way he does. By killing Lenny, George helps save the both of them by helping him continue on this path of rebirth and death. And this is what the sun is metaphorical for. This is what the sunrise and sunset is metaphorical for. Because of the fact that without the death of one, there cannot be the birth of another. Just as how without the death of Lenny, George would not have found a new purpose. He would not have found a new path, even if this new path was one of loneliness and isolation. The allusion taken from the Garden of Eden is used to further support this. We see that the Garden of Eden is very similar to the lake. Both are sanctuaries for our respective characters, and both provide food and shelter. In the myth of the Garden of Eden, the snake brings sin into the garden by tempting Adam and Eve, just like how Lenny brings trouble to George. Eventually, both Adam, just like George, fall into the temptation and consequences brought on by the snake. This goes to show that temptations for more power and more money are often what leads our characters astray from their path to their goal. In Of Mice and Men, we see that George and Lenny want to live freely, but because of the fact that George wants to buy this farm, he goes to work on Curly's farm. And this is what ultimately leads to all these events happening and the death of Lenny and the isolation of George. It just goes to show that our wants and needs can also blind us to our current predicaments of loneliness and isolation. Lastly, the characterization of Lenny in this passage provides evidence that human nature was what ultimately led to the downfall of both Lenny and George. In paragraph 6, Lenny lays his head down onto his knees. By visualizing Lenny in such a fetal position, readers will understand his helplessness and reliance on George. Despite having just murdered Curly's wife, he calms down very quickly, knowing that George will soon be here to save him. However, his mental handicap still leads to him being compared to animals, despite George's protection. The water snake is just as clueless and helpless as Lenny, constantly swimming into the mouth of predators. And this happens twice because the author wants us to note that the predisposition of humans to chase happiness and the American dream is often what leads them into cycles of isolation and loneliness. This can be seen again when old Candy's dog is shot by Carlson, and even though Candy loved his dog, he did nothing to stop it. Lenny is often compared to animals, so in this case, Candy is George's foil. This time over, he decides to shoot Lenny so Curly cannot. Whether he did so to protect Lenny or to help himself, Lenny's helpless nature amplifies the consequences of his actions and how they impacted George's dreams. For my creative piece, I decided to show the imagery of this passage by using nature and trees in my background. On one side, I drew a tree with pink leaves, and on the opposite side, I drew a tree with blue leaves. This was to show the contrast between both the heron and the water snake, as well as the different paths, one of hope and freedom, symbolized by the pink leaves, or one of isolation and loneliness, symbolized by the blue leaves. Both trees come from the same ground, because both stem from human nature, which is why I decided to use black for both the roots of the trees. What differentiates them is whether or not we fall into temptations. Both the heron and the water snake are in black, just like the roots of the trees, to show how all actions are a result of human nature. It is clear from the way the two animals are facing that they have chosen the blue tree, a tree of temptation, isolation, and loneliness. I wanted to show Steinbeck's use of imagery to create a certain mood. That's why I used pointillism, to show how there are many ways to look and interpret one action, but it is all our actions added together that create a societal and personal temptation that we may or may not fall into. To conclude, Of Mice and Men is a classic of its time because especially in this passage, humans and animals show us our realist form, one made up of loneliness caused by our very own temptation.